So, welcome everyone to today's first in the series of the Living in Ignorance. And I'm really delighted that we are joined today with Robert Luzar. Robert Luzar is an amazing artist that I've known for many years. And so it's interesting that he's going to be on the show with us today. Now, the Living in Ignorance series is all about things that people are going through that you would never know. Like beyond the perception, there are things, challenges, that perhaps we never knew about, but maybe if we did, maybe we'd be able to support people in a better way. So today we're going to hear perhaps another story behind Robert Luzar, behind what people know of him. He's an amazing artist, performance artist, drawer. He also works at Bath University as well as a senior lecturer in the fine art department. So I hope we're going to have quite an interesting conversation along those lines. So, Robert, tell us a little bit about yourself and what you do.
Right. So first of all, thanks very much. It's an honor to be here and just get this opportunity, especially to have this kind of conversation after so many years. Just a bit of background about myself. Yeah, I think you kind of said it.
Some of it. I think you have to remind people.
But yeah, you can hear, the first thing is, of course, everybody's always asked me, it's like your accent, which is Canadian. Right. So if you thought it was American, it's actually Canadian, which doesn't bother me, the distinction, but actually originally you wouldn't probably know that I'm from former Yugoslavia. And I think that's important to kind of bring up possibly over here.
Yeah.
That a little bit of background, not just professional stuff, but I was born in Yugoslavia in the 70s and then emigrated to Canada, very young boy, with mother, father, several years, kind of back and forth.
Are you an only child, by the way?
I was the only child. I was the only child. And very working class family, but also the family was just down to that unit. The entire family has always been back over in what eventually became Slovenia. So I grew up very much that kind of working class, and then with a single parent. There was a divorce at about the age of 7. Very difficult first several years of my life. So yeah, if we're talking about mental health, I think that's something you wanted to touch on.
Yeah.
So that's a bit of a background over there, but I was always an immigrant in Canada up until my late 20s before I moved to the UK, where I've been here since about 2005.
And I think that's what is so interesting, Robert, forgive me, but I think a lot of people felt or didn't even know your backstory. They didn't know that you were from Yugoslavia. People just assumed that you were Canadian or American.
Yeah.
And forgive me again, looks are very deceiving. They just probably thought this white guy, this middle class white guy who's making work and this and that and whatever. And that wasn't the case. I think that's why I was always been drawn and quite interested with your particular story.
Yes. So I mean, you're presuming already, yes, you could say that I'm middle class, but I still look at myself, and I'm reflecting on this a lot more about being working class. And quite recently, especially with the bereavement of my mom, which came up against questions about systems, healthcare systems, social systems, and this all impacted my mental health as of late, and the practice, my art practice. So two things that I'm really interested in, life changes, or specifically the concept of an event. So when we talk about systematic change today, for example, that's what I'm really interested in, an event at a kind of philosophical level, but at the profoundest level of how is it to exist and go through those changes. And I think I am going through those changes at the moment, right?
Yeah.
And the second one is trace.
Okay.
Right? And trace, I think, is a lot of people, especially in drawing, will think, making a mark. But my claim is always, I'm much more interested in the trace of what's to come, the future, going through those changes, rather than looking at the past. So I'm also looking at, especially how trace and event come close to things like trauma
Right. Okay.
across different levels of class, class struggle, race, gender,
Okay.
you know. So there we are. Yeah, and
Okay.
erasure. Sorry, I have to just mention that. That's a very key thing about traces and erasure, which is kind of paradoxical. You wouldn't think.
Okay.
Yeah.
So let's go back to, again, you told me that you were going through quite a lot of things. I think the last couple of years have been quite difficult for you, and perhaps we could speak about some of those challenges that maybe people don't know. I mean, are your colleagues aware at your university that you've gone through the things that you're about to say?
Yeah. So yes, I've just to say my colleagues over at the Bath School of Art, Film, and Media now.
Wonderful.
It's gone through these different changes. It's a great.
Or is it you got to read the changes?
The school has been going through these changes, but an amazing team and really supportive. So what happened was back in 2019, just before the pandemic, my mother suddenly passed away. It was quite violent ending. She was in Canada. I was based here, of course, working in Bath, but living in Bristol. And suddenly I just had to drop everything and go. And of course, instantly I was given, they had my back. They said, just go and then take some time off. And then also, eventually, after a few months, I needed I requested some support.
Okay.
So the university gave whatever services they could, which was quite minimal. But I basically, long story short, is I stuck with long-term therapy from a therapist who I met through the university and then continued with independently. And as of late, then there was further support because I was diagnosed as of last year through the NHS clinical depression and then shortly after PTSD.
Can I just ask you something before you go on? How hard or easy was it for you to ask for help? Now, a couple of weeks ago, we were actually having a brilliant conversation with the author of Time to Talk, Alex Holmes.
Yeah, which was great to hear.
It was absolutely brilliant. And, he spoke about, again, it being quite difficult for men to ask for help. So I don't know if that came into it. So how easy is it for you to go to your institution and say, okay, well, look, you need some time off? What was that like?
Okay. It was fine. It was easier to go to the institution to ask for support about something so difficult, because one of the hallmarks of trauma is denial, as I found out.
Right.
You don't have it. You don't want to know that you have it. But it took me over 20 years, at least, to listen to my wife.
Right.
So, who's closest to me, and her name's Natalie. So this is to give to give full credit to her, and it's. I mean, just I think I wanted to put that in perspective. It took me, within the matter of weeks to a month or so to actually bring this up with my managers and the team over at work. But it took decades, really, to finally recognize and admit when your partner, closest to you, loved one, is urging you to go and just at least ask.
Right. Okay. So how long have you been married to Natalie?
Right. So the two of us have actually been together for over 25 years.
Wow. There you go. Something you don't know there.
But we've been married for 15.
Wow. Okay. Wow. So sorry. So go back to your. So obviously you needed help, and so you've obviously gone to university to get some time off. What about your relationship or getting help like outside? So whether it's from the NHS or getting those services, what was that like?
difficult.
Mm.
Well, actually, I did approach the NHS over over 15 years ago,
Okay.
and of course, at that time, the services were in place where you just spoke with your GP, which was usually in person,
Mm.
um, and you got CBT, and it was kind of some talking therapy over there,
Mm.
but quite strategic. Um,
And
but what happened now
mm.
is that was asking for first of all a diagnosis for depression
Right.
was difficult because I mean in a nutshell, for a guy, for a man, cisgendered white man, for example, uh, you're always told to be strong, especially Eastern European, and you don't
Mm.
really bring up these things. So very difficult culturally.
Mm.
Um, and it took me quite. It took the horse, as they say, to bring it to the source with
Wow.
quite a bit of effort. Yeah.
Okay. You know what I liked about what you just said, Robert? You see, you've got a lot of awareness there. He says a cisgendered white man.
Yeah.
Now, not every cisgendered white man would actually say that they were cisgendered, right? So that's quite interesting. And I know we're going to talk a little bit about your practice
Sure.
later on, but what does that mean for you to have said that? I don't know if is it your norm that you would normally say that, or would people be shocked the fact that you've actually, they might perceive in a particular way?
Yeah. I mean, it's a matter of language, right? Which is quite for me. It's fairly new, right? Within the last number of years.
Yeah.
So for me, it just feels like I'm still trying to understand myself, especially within a whole society that's changing.
Mm.
And you can tell by my hands, I'm trying to actually sort it out. So I don't exactly feel that. I feel like you just have to be very open at the moment to things that you don't quite understand. So there we go. We talk about ignorance.
What kind of what sort of coping strategies, if you have any, like what do you put in place? And also, again, going back to the workplace, going back to your colleagues, are there things that perhaps you would like them to know about you? Like maybe one day you're not having a great day, like maybe they need to know, like maybe how to respond or maybe how to support you. Is there anything that could be useful in that way? Or perhaps you don't want to know anything.
Okay. This is, yeah, you just got me thinking, and I remembered. I was very hesitant to actually bring it up with colleagues at first.
Okay.
So I really wanted to speak only with who was the line manager.
Okay.
And not with the whole team.
Right.
Or even with certain people.
Mm-hmm.
Because you would think other people are going to start to maybe misunderstand. They already have their prejudices, or their kind of understandings that might be rather narrow, and it could be rather like a stigma, right? They could be telling you out of politeness they care.
Yeah.
However, in action, it might be different. And so I was quite hesitant about that at first. So I was very careful about who to approach, which I preferred verbally in a very confidential space, and then start slowly a conversation. Thankfully, I found out very quickly that there was a lot of support. Okay. And I'm trying to also take on board how important it is to talk about it socially rather than just privately, and it being a problem with the individual, which is something I'm learning about now.
I think you and a lot of people, isn't it? It's that shift, and actually, it's fine, it's normal. Like we're all going through certain things, some of us more than others, and yeah, we definitely need to talk about it. So again, this is why I'm really happy that you decided to do this, because you didn't really hesitate. You're just like, yep, I'm going to do it. I want to talk about it, and I think that's really needed in this day and age. Can you maybe speak a bit more about, again, how this is working with you, so the trauma that you're going through, and And again, you can give us as much as you want to give us, but how that manifests within your practice, or what the challenge is now. Has your practice come to a, I don't know, has it come to a halt in some ways, or is it transformed?
Okay. Well, I'm going to be honest, and um, I think it takes courage to bring this up also as an artist, when you're saying this professionally, and not just as an educator, lecturer, art teacher, where you have students constantly looking up to you, and peers and colleagues wondering what's next constantly. So we're in a culture of work that is so pervasive, 24/7, and I can come back to that. But yeah, coping strategies, like what to do. Well, the first coping strategy was basically to admit something's not right. And second of all, to start to take on board when you start to learn about, instead of just taking, let's say, medication, which the medical services, of course, go to first, especially coming out of the, the amount of pressure, immense, unprecedented pressure that's been put onto the NHS. So you're given these prescriptions, of course, first, but you're always encouraged, of course, to go into more in-depth therapeutic work and other kind of strategies. So I'm learning as I go, but the first, especially with depression and with PTSD, is the first recommendation is rest. Right. So historically, it was always rest. What does rest sort of mean? Which is interesting because there's a lot of discussion nowadays, or kind of interest in kind of stopping, doing nothing. And I have these conversations with certain performance art friends, both here and in Canada, doing nothing or doing the least. And which is interesting in a certain way, especially when we talk about that with work. But I mean, for your mental health, it's really important is first rest and then learn. And instead of taking action all the time, I think now, I'm going to be just kind of firm on this, is there's this whole, it's almost as if it's given. You always have to be moving or in action all the time and producing things. But more than ever, I think we're at a certain point historically and socially that, is it time really to be learning a lot more? So as Lenin said, learn.
And I suppose there's different ways of learning. I mean, you told me earlier that you've got about 17 books on the go. Yeah, that's one type of way of learning. And I suppose there's other ways of learning which are a bit more, that you just, what's the word, that you that you absorb.
Yeah.
Things that you pick up along the way as well. Okay. I want to know, again, it's not like you're going anywhere, I know you're still at your university, but how would you feel about disclosing this? Like, if you're going for artist events, like, do you tell people that perhaps, I don't know what the line is there in terms of disclosing, like, you've got depression, I mean, you've got PTSD, there's quite a few, is there, or?
It's enough.
That's enough. That's enough, yeah, we've heard it's enough. Do you feel like you have to disclose any of that information work-wise?
Oh, this is all very recent.
Okay.
And second of all, their diagnoses, and even people who professionally are in this field, they question what is a diagnosis and what is the actual condition rather than an illness. And how could that be used as not just something that is a disability that, in the narrow sense, that holds you back or cripples you or whatever it is, but rather than going back to my interest as an event, can be something worked through. So to work through something, it's a psychoanalytic concept or method, and you work through something either to well, learn to live with it, or you can actually overcome it.
Okay.
And actually, there are treatments now, that one of which I'm waiting for, which is called EMDR,
Okay.
which an EMDR is known to have a success rate to overcome. So you can actually overcome and be and substantially heal from something like trauma.
Okay. Can I ask
Mm.
you? So in terms of your practice,
Yeah, which I haven't really started, but I
yeah.
can get
Now,
there.
is your practice informed by your trauma, or are you making practice for the sake of practice?
Hmm.
You know, people, you have art therapy, and
Yeah.
people will turn to certain things. So I'm just curious now whether that's, or some of you used to have it, and some of you still have it.
Yeah.
So a mother gets pregnant, and the artwork then becomes about motherhood and pregnancy and things like that.
Yeah.
Is that in some ways informing what you do?
Yeah. It never did from the beginning, but
Okay.
looking back,
Was always
specifically retroactively,
there. Okay.
so people will talk about an event philosophically as the future is in the past, as I would call it, right? Future is in the past, meaning that you reinterpret suddenly. Something happens and you have to reinterpret the past.
Right.
And it's not that you have to look ahead, but you have to see what you missed before but was already there.
Wow.
So I have always had trauma, going right back to my earliest memories and before. So there's a question of what I can't even remember, but it's in the body, as people say now, and I can finally recognize that. Hence why I do a lot of performance art, and I'm interested in the notion of the body. So yeah, the future is in the past, and it could be somewhere very much corporeal. It's not just in the mind. And yeah, what's there to say? I mean, now I never really would have said trauma, artist who's interested in trauma. It was always trace an event, but I think to make that more kind of tangible for a lot of people, it definitely, a traumatic event is a life-changing event, or it's terminal at the same time. So it's always it's difficult, what how willing people are to actually do things like a man going ahead, asking for help. Second of all, talking about something and doing something that isn't just about taking medication, but actually doing the hardest and most important work, which is, I still believe in this, and I take the recommendation, is to talk, and how important it is to talk. But slowly I am trying to get to making artworks that, performance, live art, actually have real.
I can see the synergy. I mean, I was telling you, I was up all night trying to get my book done.
Right. Yeah.
And one of the things that I was actually reading was around, the unmarked as well. That there's power in not being able to say these things or to give life to these things. And what actually strikes me, many years ago when we were doing a PhD, I can't lie to you, Rob, I didn't know what you were doing. But I knew you were doing something. I just couldn't put my finger on it, and I was always just really intrigued about it. And maybe, like you say, this is retrospectively. Now we're looking back, and now it makes sense. Even when you're talking about a trace or a memory, it's like that fleeting thing. And if you haven't seen Robert Luzar's practice, please, you can check and you can find them out online. So please go and do so. But now it really makes sense, given what we're talking about. And I think it was Peggy Phelan who was actually reading a bit about her work, and she wrote, I think it was called The Politics of Performance or something along those lines.
Classic text,
exactly.
Anybody who's in the performance art field, right?
There you go. So there's something about that unmarkedness as well, and you never really get it. And actually, the moment you get it, that's when it's all bets are off. So yeah, I find this just really, really interesting.
Yeah.
Can we say a little bit more? You said about talking.
Yeah.
I mean, what would be helpful for people, and how do you even build that trust to go and talk to someone?
Yeah, maybe this is. Well, there are two things over here. I don't want to make this messy. I think maybe this might be an opportunity to actually talk about maybe a body of work, or how I've actually brought in talking a little bit. But just to say very briefly, yeah, approaching somebody who is professionally trained as a therapist,
Right.
and there are many different traditions.
Mm.
I'm interested in a psychoanalytic approach
Mm.
because of art. You know, we do a lot of stuff around
Yeah.
psychoanalysis. But I have somebody from a different tradition, and I've just managed to make something. You have to find this synergy. Trust is enormous. It took me
Mm.
3 years to finally say, I trust you.
Mm.
And things start to really click and move there. So
Mm.
talking with trust is really, really important. The artwork, though, I've been thinking a lot more of trying to find ways of talking with the audience. And I think the image I gave you, which was part of a piece called um, uh, Tracing Someone Else's Skin, which is based on first looking at or browsing on the internet. So let's say on your smartphone, with the first heading, body marking,
Mm.
and taking all these kind of images that come up, which is usually like tattoos and
Yeah.
birthmarks and all that, and scars and all sorts of bizarre things as well. And so I actually was printing these these thumbnails of different body markings, and then getting audience members to actually use Sharpie markers or pens
Right.
to start to quickly copy those things onto my skin and then press me into the ground, onto the kind of makeshift ground of um, yoga mats
Right.
and camping mats and cardboard and paper. So kind of palimpsest starts to build between the skin and the floor. But I'm talking with the audience at the same time, and we're all kind of reciting the name of the body marking and the URL. So there's a bit of a kind of bit of speech going on over there, but this kind of also elaborated around a body of work that I'm, no pun intended, body, right? Where I'm making drawings over in front of an audience. This is in Bristol in 2020, where I was stationed, and I kind of made a space like an office space. It was part of an exhibition, um, group exhibition, and basically the audience were invited to actually see me draw on a pad as a kind of office worker, and start to actually have conversations that would alter the content. And those conversations were amazing because, of course, we just had the Colston statue that got pulled down. Um, BLM, just Black Lives Matter was that that kind of inertia was coming over here. Plus, COVID was going on, and all sorts of we're starting to actually think about white supremacy and other kind of racism starting to come out. And so it's a very important time to actually talk about these things, which is including me, because I'm not somebody that knows exactly all this stuff, even if I have a doctorate or PhD or my life experiences. Going back to this thing, there is a kind of another form of or depth of the ignorance that really, I think it's really important to use the talking, but be I can't get the word over here.
I love that, the depths of the ignorance.
Yes, I mean it's an abyss, right? And I think there's a kind of humility. That's what I want to say. How important it is, especially for a white male, again, straight or cisgender, whatever you want to say, who's already put in that position of power to say, I don't know. And that's, you don't have to be the master of all knowledge. But I think that can be challenging for a lot of people, or men, not only, but it's a question.
Okay, so tell me where you're at now. Like, what's happening with you now? Whether work, whether through your therapy or.
Yeah. So going back to sing the praises of my team over a bath spa. I was told to take 3 months off, which I've pretty much finished, and started to gradually come back. It's called a phased return. Right. So there's a lot of it's the lightest workload. There's a lot of they're constantly monitoring, asking how you doing, what can you do, Uh, so potentially I could take more time off, but I don't want to,
Okay.
because I would like to feel a little bit more purpose. So the work,
Mhm.
teaching work is there. Artwork I've had to really put on hold because that's far more complicated. I could say I don't know this, but I've heard the word disassociation
Right. Okay.
comes up. So you feel profoundly disconnected in my
Mm.
case with what's going on, um, and that hurts. That's a lot.
Yeah, because
Yeah.
like I said, I always think that you are the ideal or the image of the artist, and it's going to be you. So I mean,
Yeah.
for you to say that you've got to a point where you actually can't give, like, like the tank is empty when it comes to practice, I think that's quite a lot, and I hope that shifts at some point.
Thank you.
But that is quite a lot, and you know, it actually just reminds me. I know, was it in the last couple of weeks we had was it Jacinda Ardern, the New Zealand Prime Minister,
Yeah.
saying, you know, she needed to step back, and I think that is incredibly brave, regardless of everyone's talking about, you know, the gendered politics of it, you know, being women. But I think, you know, people forgetting that point that she was able to say, you know what, the tank is empty, I can't do it, and that takes a lot. I think that takes a lot of guts to say that, you know, you're going to step back. And I wish we all had that in our tanks to do as well. Obviously, you know, you might need to be financially secure before you can do that.
Yeah.
But I do think there is something. Yeah, you're right. I think there's something about choice or having the, what's the word? You know, when you're the master of your own destiny, sort of thing.
Okay.
Yeah, so there's something quite powerful about her doing that. I don't know what you think in regards to that, and also your own situation.
Yeah. Well, yeah. Why should you? You know what? Yeah, that's an interesting question. I think you find yourself asking or talking to that conscience, that other or the other voices. I'm not saying that we're all. Yeah, we're not psychotic over here in that way. But there is something about the complexity of how many different voices, and genetically also, but historically and culturally shape us. And when you start to actually listen to yourself, because you need to stop, it's an incredible opportunity. It's the hardest work. I'll admit, it's the hardest work. You can build a house, you can do all the things you want until, I work 24, 16-hour days and all this. Sorry. When you finally amount to digging into something like working through, as I said, as Freud called it, Durcharbeiten. It means you're confronting, well, truth, and sometimes truth is most of the time it's going to be, truth hurts, and you're finding things that truly hurt you. That's on an individual level, and you need to give that time, and you need to not just stop, but you need to shift gears and give that time. So it's to give time. What is time? To give to something like this, and not be taking on the that kind of social economic inertia, that wave. You must produce, you must work, you must be the artist with the next thing, and if nobody pays attention to you on social media, you're gone. That's okay. I pulled my social media account. That's a longer story. It's for mental health, but also on principle, politically. Sorry. It's also to say, the studio, everything, or wherever the studio is or what you do, it's totally fine to let it settle, and that in a certain way, maybe today that is a political act. And having the privilege of also teaching means that I can bring back that question about learning. So I need to have this conversation now, and I'm using this platform to also tell my audience and colleagues and students and peers and friends and loved ones, um, don't hold back yourselves, and I'm here to be alongside everybody else if they want to have that conversation.
Brilliant. And I think that comes to a natural stop, because I was going to say, what could you give us as we end? What could you part with? And I think you've said that really beautifully. So I want to say thank you for coming on the show. And we wish you all the best with everything. Hopefully we'll get you back again, to talk maybe a bit more about the trace, because I think that might boggle the mind. no pun intended. And we'll speak to you soon. And thank you for thank you for being you, Rob.
Thank you.
And thank you to everyone. And we'll see you next time.
Pleasure.